text, we can push your talk in different directions. It was interesting that you said, I'll begin with a quote from Robert Taft. One of his articles begins by saying, where is the dance when the dancer isn't dancing? And what happens to dance when there is no dancer? And he wanted to use that as an example of what happens to liturgy when liturgy is not actually happening. He wanted to underline the fact that liturgy is actually a physical reality that has many different aspects. And I think you can answer his question, what happens to the dancer when the dancer isn't dancing, is that liturgy becomes text. Liturgy becomes a written word that people can then study and analyze. And perhaps that's the direction that the study of Byzantine liturgy has taken. It's very much concentrated on textual studies. The people who began this this form of study basically were philologists, so their interest was in philology, and their interest was in creating an urtext of liturgical moments. And by doing this, they produced some monstrosities of pseudo philological studies of liturgical moments. So that's one problem that's always been, say, with the Byzantine liturgical studies, is the question of text. Now, the other very interesting point you put is, why did liturgy or the study of liturgy interest decrease after, and you mentioned Alexander Smerman there, and Kavanagh, I think you were talking about Kavanagh. And I think you did give the answer. The answer is because Alexander Smerman is a terrible historian. He's just a bad historian. His history is very, very bad. From Kavanagh, I don't know, but I do know Smerman's history is catastrophic at times. Now, just because Smerman is a bad historian, it doesn't mean that we have to necessarily discount history as a source of understanding our theology. And I think this is the case, especially, again, going back to Byzantine liturgy, because we have such a poor knowledge of our own history. I think this is somewhat different in the Latin Church, because in the Latin Church you have various moments when people put a stop to liturgy, when it becomes a set, concrete form of the rite, which is endorsed as the standard form of the rite. The rite itself has been endorsed by the Pope. Such a situation never happens in the Eastern Church. The thing that actually set the liturgy in the form that we have it today is just the printing press. Usually some businessman went to the nearest monastery, got his manuscript, printed it, and sold it. And the church, no Eastern church has ever been able to muster enough intellectual power to produce what one might call a standard text of anything. Even, I think you know that the first official liturgy of John Chrysostom for the Ukrainian Orthodox, the Ukrainian Catholic Church, whose signed union with Rome in 1596, wasn't it? Yes. Yeah, I think it was 1946 that they produced their first official copy of the liturgy of John Chrysostom, wasn't it? About 500 years later, they eventually got. Wow. And then this became in Old Church Slavonic, and immediately they started to translate it into a myriad number of unofficial Ukrainian translations of the liturgy. So this question of the text, as text, is extremely important in the Eastern Church. I just thought of two. Have you looked at the work of Edward Kilmartin?
Yes.
Yes. Now, I'd say Edward Kilmartin to me seems to be somebody in the Latin Church who actually tries to join together some theological understanding with historical understanding. It's Chinese to me, but he does try very, very hard to do that. And I think he's one of the few people that actually does that. And just this question of loci theologici, I'd say that's very, very interesting point, because again, from the Eastern perspective, what we see in encounters between the Eastern Church and the Western Church is that they do use the liturgy as a prism to examine each other. So you have a series of these loci that the Latin Church used to judge the Eastern Church. You can see this in the Council of Florence, for example. You can see it even later in various commissions that the Vatican set up to produce liturgical texts for the Eastern Church. And these commissions examined the Byzantine liturgical text under certain headings. These headings were never really announced and never really made clear. But if you read, for example, the introduction of Benedict XV to the Ephelonian that was published in, when was it, 17 blah blah blah, he enunciates the principles that the Commission used to evaluate the liturgical life of the Eastern Church. And some of these are just those things that you mentioned, those 10 things that you mentioned. Other thing I was just going to say is you said that there were one Roman Rite and so 13 other churches. If you go to a Roman Mass today, perhaps you might think there are 13 Roman churches and only 2 other Eastern churches. The development of diversity within the Roman Rite today is quite amazing. So I think that's basically all that I would like to suggest about what you are saying when you bring that over into the context that we are here now. And it's a matter of vital importance. You spoke about the idea of sensitivity, of that feeling of ourness about something. You know, this is the way we do things. You may have noticed since you came here that we are 13 days behind everybody else for a very good reason, because we have our calendar. Now, if you try and change our calendar, you will see exactly what sort of pajamas we wear at breakfast. And so there are many sort of these sensitivities that exist here. So liturgical theology is of vital importance because it's a question of identity, of national identity almost. And in the context of a university, then you have the pressure of a methodology to examine something which is of national importance. And that can lead to a great deal of conflict, because the liturgists in an academic context are quite aware of the importance of their subject, but it is rather difficult to express that importance in academic categories. And so there is in some ways, since the fall of communism, there has been the ability for, say, the Russian Orthodox Church, for example, and for the various Ukrainian Orthodox churches, to actually begin an active intellectual life. And the results, as far as liturgy is concerned, have been very, very disappointing. And some of that problem is simply the methodological problems that you have pointed out, that we don't have a good methodology, methodology that is acceptable to academic institutions, acceptable to the church, and in the final analysis, acceptable to the people who pray in the thing. But I tell you, it is a very, very serious question. It's not an abstract question at all, nor is it an academic question, but it is a question of daily life. Okay.
Do you want to react immediately?
Well, there are a couple of things. Thank you very much for your reflections. I do think that methods in liturgical theology is a key problem. And just last year, this major tome by Kevin Irwin was republished. So Context and Text, a method for liturgical theology. The original version is from 1994, and he, after 25 years, he completely revised it and added a lot of material. And I think it's very timely that this book now appears. And my own little thing is just meant as a kind of footnotes to that to that major work. And however, I do prefer that we that we leave the methodological questions for tomorrow, where I will make a case for, on the basis of theological considerations, for methodological pluralism. in liturgical theology. I think that's the wisest thing to do. There is no just one method of doing it, and no one good method of liturgical theology that simply doesn't exist, and it shouldn't exist. So there is no reason why that would be an optimal one discipline, one method, and one frame of thought. I think that it is not a good thing. However, that's for tomorrow. I also want to say some things about your idea about what you said about text and its importance after the dance. I think that's correct, but I think that theft makes though related, but another point, the one that I am stressing, in the sense that the question of what happens after the dance and how it is connected to the dance is not only a question about preservation and continuation and the possibility to study, but I think it is also a very profound pastoral question and a very important spiritual question. And here I would be reminded of what the Second Vatican Council said, that the liturgy is the source and the summit of the entire Christian life. That means that everything you do as a Christian leads towards the Eucharist, and that any initiative, any idea that you would take flows forth from the Eucharist or from the liturgy, more broadly understood. So I think that we need models of reflection that can make that connection, and the existence and the traditions, and I mean that literally in the sense of passing on to the next generation of text, is only one possible but very important means of making those connections. But I think that, especially from a liturgical point of view, you always have to see those texts against a cultural background, and also more specifically a ceremonial context, because liturgical texts are scripts that are used in the context of a celebration, and we need to take that into account. But for the importance of liturgical text and the importance also of euchology, the study of prayers, for liturgical theology, I rely on the work of, amongst others, Martin Klokkerer from Fribourg, and also Julia Day, an Anglican scholar in Helsinki. She has these very intriguing reflections about what actually is text, and she refers to the original etymology of the concept text, which has to do with tissue and with weaving, with the tapestry, and with combining meanings. And I think that in as much as liturgical theology studies texts, it is not only about the means through which things are passed on, but also about those interweaving and intertwinement of many, many meanings, which always surpass the text